falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it, or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm Podcast.
Okay, welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio. My guest today is HJ Hornbeck, and we're going to be talking about the recent grievances fields, I guess. Yeah,
Grievances Studies.
Grievances Studies, attempt at hoaxing by Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay, and I'm not sure...
Pluckrose is her last name. I forgot her first, though. I apologize for that.
Yeah, I also don't recall her first name, but and it was I guess promoted by Arrow magazine, and they put out a YouTube video on it as well. Mm-hmm. So I guess first, why don't we get to know you and kind of where you're coming from on this subject?
Sure. You can sort of call me an enlightened amateur. I just got my master's in computer science, like I think you can measure it in days ago. So I'm sort of, enlightened amateur, but at the same time, I have taken numerous women's studies courses. As a kid, I've been obsessed with science, and as a computer scientist, also epistemology. So I'm kind of at this weird perfect storm where I kind of have enough information to basically point out Boghossian's bullshit.
Right.
And enough writing skill that it actually sounds kind of decent. So, lucky me.
Good stuff. So I guess, what was their what did they actually accomplish here? Or what did they actually do?
Well, that depends on who you ask. I would like to say, well, both a heck of a lot of nothing and a heck of a lot of everything, too. It's kind of important to sort of place this historically within other types of things like this. I mean, people have been talking about feminism and misrepresenting it pretty much ever since the term feminism was invented.
Right.
One of the earliest examples I can think of is somebody actually misrepresenting... it was Christina Hoff Sommers representing Brown Miller, saying that she was arguing that only 2% of, reports to the police about sexual assault are false.
Okay.
Which actually turns out to be pretty credible overall. I mean, there's Andrea Dworkin and all that, so this is fairly long and going on and all that. We're going to get to sort of the granddaddy of it, Alan Sokol and his hoax as well. But I got a little bit of a treat for you first.
Okay.
All right, in the chat, I am sending you a PDF.
Okay.
This is another scientific paper. Have you read many scientific papers at all?
I've read a few here and there. I mean, I'm not educated in science, so I've always read them from an amateur's perspective, but. Okay,
well, we'll see how you do on this one. Basically, just read me the abstract from it, and then I'll quiz you a little bit on what it is and what it says.
Okay, just gotta wait for it to load here quick. Okay, so the abstract. Zoom in a little bit. My eyes aren't what they should be. Mm-hmm. Okay, so should I read the title as well?
Nah, just go with the abstract. Okay. I think that gets the point.
Okay, the abstract. We propose some novel tools to combat the long-existing problem of intergalactic parasites, such as Plasmodic. Yeah, I'm not going to even try that. Which are known to have caused havoc amongst various populations. We present solution after attentively observing various scientific procedures undertaken by the greatest scientists of our times who existed in segmented claymation. Okay. In total, we have investigated 31 different experiments and proposed this groundbreaking quick fix, which will truly transform the field. we'd also like to boast that our work has received accolades from the scientists whose work we followed, including the greats like Ronald Isaac and Charles Kao. Okay.
All right. Question 1. Is this a legitimate paper or a hoax one?
I would guess a hoax.
Well, darn, that is correct. Congrats. Yeah, that was actually authored by the second author that's in there, Farouk Ali Khan. A lot of the weird references actually are Rick and Morty references. So, like, even the first author in there, I think, is Ben Smith. That's a Rick and Morty reference, you know.
Okay, yeah.
Almost everything sort of ties back to Rick and Morty in some way.
Nice.
I mean, obvious forgery, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know, I don't even have to ask why you think it's a forgery, right?
No, it seems... Nope. So what is this journal that it got into?
Well, actually, it was submitted to 14 separate biology journals.
Okay.
Of those 14, it was printed without changes in 3 of them.
Really?
Yep. And it was accepted in 5 more journals. They were demanding payment, though, before printing. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, this hoax actually was happening at the exact same time Boghossian and friends were crafting their hoax as well. The point of this one actually was basically to sort of show that there are a lot of shoddy, low-quality journals out there which will accept pretty much anything and print anything. The goal here is basically they're trying to sort of rake in the dough and bring things in. Yeah, that's the whole accept and 5 more.
Right. This kind of came up with their last hoax too. Was like the predatory journals type situation. Exactly.
Yeah, you focus on, low quality journals and all that. It's going to be pretty guaranteed you're going to get something printed, right?
Right.
Okay. Let's move on to number 2. I am sending you a second paper.
All right.
This one actually is quite famous. You no doubt have heard of Alan Sokal, right?
Yes. Okay.
Have you ever read his hoax paper, though?
I have not read the hoax paper. I've read many articles discussing it. In relation to last 2 years ago's penis hoax or whatever it was, and various other articles about it. But
oh yeah, everybody mentions it, everybody references it, and all that. But I mean, that's the thing. You have not ever read it, even though it's popped up in a ton of articles. I actually never read it until I think less than 12 hours ago.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So everybody talks about it, but nobody reads it. So I tell you what. I'm going to ask you to read, there's no abstract on this one, so just try reading the first paragraph from it, and tell me what you think, just sort of ignoring that this is entirely from Alan Sokal and all that in the history.
Okay.
Just read that first paragraph, tell me what you think.
There are many natural scientists, and especially physicists, who continue to reject the notion that the disciplines concerned with social and cultural criticism can have anything to contribute, except perhaps peripherally, to their research. Still less are they receptive to the idea that the very foundations of their worldview must be revised or rebuilt in the light of such criticism. Rather, they cling to the dogma imposed by the long post-Enlightenment hegemony over the Western intellectual outlook, which can be summarized briefly as follows: that there exists an external world whose properties are independent of any individual human being, and indeed of humanity as a whole, that these properties are encoded in eternal physical laws, and that human beings can obtain reliable, albeit imperfect and tentative knowledge of these laws by hewing to the objective procedures and epistemological strictures prescribed by the so-called scientific method.
All right. Same question as last time. Is that a hoax or is that the real deal?
Well, it's certainly far less obvious as a hoax. Like that actually is that paragraph isn't terrible.
No, it's not, is it?
It makes sense, actually.
Yeah. No, I actually read over it a fair bit, and I came to much the same conclusion. So, let me hit you with another paragraph. This one I'm not going to share with you, but I'm going to read to you, and, tell me what you think of it.
Okay.
Psychology is distinguished by reciprocal relationships, which depend on the unity of our consciousness, and which exhibit a striking similarity with the physical consequences of the quantum of action. We are thinking here of well-known characteristics of emotion and volition, which are quite incapable of being represented by visualizable pictures. In particular, the apparent contrast between the continuous onward flow of associative thinking and the preservation of the unity of the personality exhibit analogy with the relation between the wave description of the motions of material particles and their indestructible individuality. So what do you think? Hoax or legit?
I really couldn't tell.
Not really?
Yeah, like, yeah, I don't know.
Well, it sounds an awful lot like what Sokol wrote, right?
Right.
And his was a hoax, right?
Yeah. So then I guess maybe that's a hoax?
Incorrect. That was written by Niels Bohr, one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics.
Oh, okay.
Back in the 1930s. Here, let me hit you with another one.
Okay.
This thesis, light consists of particles, and the antithesis, light consists of waves, fought with one another until they were united in the synthesis of quantum mechanics. Only why not apply it to the thesis of liberalism or capitalism, the antithesis communism, and expect a synthesis instead of a complete and permanent victory for the antithesis? There must be a relation between the latitudes of freedom, delta F, and of regulation, delta R, and of the type delta F times delta R. But what is the political constant P? I must leave this to a future quantum theory of human affairs. Want to guess who said that?
I have no idea.
Werner Heisenberg.
Okay.
And he was not writing a hoax paper. But you can see that, what Sokol was proposing as something that was supposed to be completely batshit and all that actually sounds an awful lot like what real scientists have proposed and said in the past.
Yeah.
A lot of the quantum mechanics people from the 1930s and all that actually were proposing an institute where they would set up basically just to try and apply the things they've learned from studying physics and apply it to society as a whole.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this actually is not, weird at all. There is tells that there's things that are wrong, but they're not what you would expect. Like there was one I found actually related to boundary conditions, where basically they actually get the meaning of boundary conditions wrong. The thing is, though, you have to have in-depth physics knowledge to get that.
Right.
Would the people at a gender studies or whatever journal have that in-depth knowledge?
That's not their field of study, right?
No. And on top of that, Alan Sokol submitted this paper as Alan Sokol, an employee of the Department of Physics at a well-known university.
Okay.
Would you think to check that a physicist had gotten the physics wrong?
Probably not if that's not my field of expertise, right?
No, exactly. So the tells that would have told you that this was a hoax, it's kind of reasonable that nobody would actually look for.
Right.
The main thesis of it, though, the sort of core central idea, is correct. Or at least reasonable anyway.
Right.
But, if you actually read Alan Sokol's write-up on it, he says almost the reverse. He's like, oh yeah, I threw in some tells and all that in the physics side. But the core idea is fundamentally insane. It makes no sense. He didn't actually understand his own hoax.
Interesting.
Yeah. You actually read I should send you the link for what he said after it, but we can do that afterwards.
Sure.
Basically, he sounds exactly like Peter Boghossian.
Right.
All the exact same language. He had no idea what his hoax demonstrated, and I'd argue actually that his hoax demonstrated that if you call yourself a physicist, people are going to trust that you got the physics right.
Yeah, which isn't a stretch.
No. Okay. So, that sounds sort of an awful lot like what Boghossian and the other folks, Pendergast and all that, have proposed, right?
Right.
Yeah, it wouldn't be surprising if they actually submitted something like that. And, if you've sort of been reading my blog posts, in your case in particular, that's sort of my central thesis. All right. In fact, we can actually sort of look at their write-up and methodology and tell it. Like, here, I'm reading from the write-up they had on Arrow magazine. Sometimes we thought a nutty or an inhumane idea up and ran with it. What if we write a paper saying we should train men like we do dogs to prevent rape culture? Hence came the, quote, dog park paper.
Right.
Here's their same description in their methodology document, which is a little bit more elaborate. That dog parks are, quote, rape condoning spaces, unquote, and a place of rampant canine rape culture and systematic oppression against the, quote, oppressed dog, unquote, through which human attitudes to both problems can be measured and analyzed by applying black feminist criminology. This is done to provide insights into training men out of sexual violence and bigotry, which they are prone. Arguably our worst paper. Done. Okay, well, that's
a matter of opinion, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of sounds like the first one, from Al Khan, right?
Right.
Training men like dogs? That's ridiculous.
Right.
All right, well, let me hand you that third link.
Okay.
We are actually going to go over their paper in depth.
Nice.
All right. Should have had it copied and pasted already, but got a little behind the scenes. There we go.
That's all right.
Copy pasted into the chat.
Okay, I've got it loading now. Okay, here we go.
All right. How about this time I get you to read the abstract? Maybe we'll sort of trade back and forth a little bit as we go along.
Sounds
I'll
good.
get you started with the abstract.
Okay, so abstract. This article addresses questions in human geography and the geographies of sexuality by drawing upon 1 year of embedded in situ observations of dogs and their human companions at 3 public dog parks in Portland, Oregon. The purpose of this research is to uncover emerging themes in human and canine interactive behavioral patterns in urban dog parks to better understand human A-/moral decision-making in public spaces and uncover bias and emergent assumptions around gender, race, and sexuality. Specifically, and in order of priority, I examine the following questions. 1. How do human companions manage, contribute, and respond to violence in dogs? 2. What issues surround queer performativity and human reaction to homosexual sex between and among dogs? And 3. Do dogs suffer oppression based upon perceived gender? He concludes by applying black feminist criminology categories through which my observations can be understood and by inferring from lessons relevant to human and dog interactions to suggest practical applications that disrupt hegemonic masculinities and improves access to emancipatory spaces.
All right.
Okay.
It sounds more like Sokol than Al Khan, right?
Right.
But notice something else. Let me read back what the write-up said again. What if we write a paper saying we should train men like we do dogs to prevent rape culture?
That's okay.
That's not in the abstract, is it?
No, that's not in the abstract at all.
No. They're telling people that, this is a paper that says we should train men like we do dogs. It's not in the abstract, though. There is, however, one phrase which kind of, is kind of questionable there. At the very end of the abstract, there is a phrase, quote, suggest practical applications.
Okay.
See, that provides a little bit of wriggle room. So you can see that sort of the bulk of it isn't about that. But that phrase suggests that there might be something related to that in there, right?
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, if I told you, hey, we're talking about that, and you saw that phrase in there, you might pop on and be like, oh, well, okay, well, maybe that's the section that it's on.
Right.
Okay, so it doesn't look like it's about training men like dogs, but there's still at least a little bit of wiggle room there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You've read a few papers, right? So you know that they're basically sort of structured in the following format. You've got an abstract up front, which is a summary,
right.
Sort of that. You've got an introduction, a related work section, which sort of goes over sort of like a high-level overview and talks about what other people have done.
Right.
There's usually a hypothesis section, sort of describing what your actual theory is, followed by a methodology section. That's where you sort of get into the nitty-gritty of, the paper itself, what you did, how you did it, etc. This is usually followed up by a results section, what you observed, more or less.
Right.
Finally, there's sort of a discussion and future work section where you sort of get a little bit, pie in the sky and talk about other things related to that, right?
Okay.
Okay,
yeah,
so
that's the section where you say, this requires more research.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this requires more research, give me more money.
Yeah. All
right, well, so obviously, if we're going to look in the paper and try and find evidence for where they talk about, training men like dogs, the methodology would be the key place to go, right? Because that's describing what the paper is doing.
Right.
Right. So, okay, turn to page 6. This time I'll be doing the reading.
Okay.
And I'll just give sort of a quick summary that's there, and you can actually double check that I'm sort of accurately summarizing what's there.
Okay.
So you can sort of be my second on that.
Sounds good.
All right. Page 6, methodology. From the 10th of June 2016 to the 10th of June 2017, I stationed myself on benches that were in central observation locations at 3 dog parks in southeast Portland, Oregon. During these observational sessions, I gave particular scrutiny to two space-defining categories of A, or morally salient behavior. Human companion behavior as it related to dogs and canine actions. The former fall into the former, moral behavior category. How human companions engaged, ignored, or broke up dog fights and dog humping/rapes, a collection of dog droppings, use of leashes, blah, 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 blah. The following fall into the latter category of A/moral canine behavior. Penetrative acts amongst dogs, humping without penetration, dog fights and urinating, blah, blah, blah. Ignored nonviolent interactions, from observing human-dog interactions. Right, that sounds like an accurate summary, right?
Right, yeah.
Does that have anything to do with training men like dogs?
No.
Absolutely nothing.
There's nothing there about training men in any way.
No. They literally sat, according to the methodology, which they didn't actually do. They faked all this data. According to them, they sat on a park bench and watched people interact with their dogs.
Right. And then, kind of categorize these actions, right?
Exactly. Just sort of sat down and tallied up what was happening. Okay, well, maybe we just don't know what's exactly happening here. Maybe we're just so ignorant of gender studies and all that, we don't get it. Well, there's an easy way to verify that. The results section. Because the methodology and the results are kind of the mirror image of one or the other.
Okay, yeah.
Methodology says, here's what we did. Results is, here's what we got back.
Right.
So, if we're misunderstanding things, then the results section should have something related to training men like dogs.
Sure.
Okay, this one I'm going to get you to do. There's only about 4 paragraphs, and you don't have to read it all. Just sort of read enough to sort of get the gist across. Flip to page 8, and it should be fairly well marked. Start from the first line of the first paragraph and just skim over it and sort of get the gist across.
Okay, averaging across my data, in my observational vicinity, there was approximately 1 dog rape/humping incident every 60 minutes, which is 1,004 documented dog rape/humping incidents, and 1 dog fight every 71 minutes, which is 847 documented dog fights. Here I use Palmer's criteria for rape, noting that my anthropomorphic limitations in assessing when a humping incident constitutes rape in dogs. Okay. The phrase dog humping incident documents only those incidents in which the activity appeared unwanted from my perspective. The humping dog having given no encouragement and apparently not enjoying the activity. Okay.
You can quit when you get bored.
Yeah.
Or do you think we made the point?
These numbers increased or decreased based on the number of male dogs present at any given time. So they're kind of just going through okay, so I saw X number of dog rapes or dog fights or what have you. Human companions took active roles in intervening in incidents between dogs, providing an avenue for insight into the gendered status of the A/moral paradox in human interpretations of domesticated canine behavior. So far, I see nothing related to training men in any way.
No, it matches up with the methodology exactly. There is nothing in here about training men like dogs.
Right.
Let me quote back again how they describe the paper. Sometimes we just thought a nutty or inhumane idea up and ran with it. What if we write a paper saying we should train men like we do dogs to prevent rape culture? That's not there.
Okay. Surely that's got to be in some conclusion or something, right?
Allow me to point you to the section which actually talks about such things.
Okay.
It is on page 16, and I'll read this one, by the way. All right. Metaphorically, however, we are now better positioned to answer the question, quote, what specific and thematic lessons can be learned from dog parks that have the potential to further equity, diversity, inclusion, and peaceful coexistence and improve human-animal spaces, unquote. For example, in dealing with dog rape/humping, though all forms of human physical assault are still violence against the vulnerable and cannot be condoned, the administration of electric shocks at the first signs of rape-like behavior within my observations always elicited a rapid cessation. Blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
By non-violent analogy, by publicly or otherwise openly and suddenly yelling at males when they begin to make sexual advances on females, and by making firm and repeated stands against rape culture in society, activism, and media, human males may metaphorically, quote, shocked, may be, metaphorically, quote, shocked, unquote,
Jesus Christ.
out of regarding sexual violence, sexual harassment, and rape culture as normative, which may decrease rape rates and disrupt rape culture and emancipate rape-condoning spaces. The reining in or, quote, leashing, unquote, of men in society, however, can again be understood pragmatically on a metaphorical level, with clear parallels to dog training, quote, pedagogical, unquote, methodologies. By appropriately educating human men to respect women, denounce rape culture, refuse to rape, or stand by while sexual assault occurs, demasculinize spaces, and espouse feminist ideals, and so on in any institutions, human men can be, quote, leashed, unquote, by a culture that refuses to victimize women, perpetuate rape culture, or permit rape-condoning spaces.
So
that is where they talk about...
Yeah. They did an entire paper and then just threw this section in as a metaphor.
As a metaphor.
Oh, jeez.
As a metaphor.
Wow.
Now, the only way that you could maybe sort of salvage something from this, I mean, it's obvious that they've misrepresented what this paper actually means.
Yeah.
But the only way we could potentially salvage it is if the reviewers actually, said, oh, well, this isn't a metaphor. This actually should be something we should implement. Well, they also released the peer reviewer results that they got back.
Okay.
And guess what?
What?
They didn't view it as a metaphor. They viewed it as a metaphor.
Right. They didn't view it as, actually something that should be put into practice.
No. It was quite clear that all the reviewers thought it was a metaphor. Basically, Boghossian and co. lied to us.
Right. They
said, and I'm going to quote them again just to make the point, what if we write a paper saying we should train men like we do dogs to prevent rape culture? When you actually read the paper, their training is education. Talking about, male dominance, toxic masculinity and all that. It's nothing to do with what they actually say.
No.
And I mean, this sort of gets to the greater problem. You never read the so-called hoax paper until I sent it to you, right?
Right.
Even though you've only read like one paragraph of it.
Yeah.
I never read the so-called paper until today. Nobody reads these hoax papers.
Right.
And yet, we implicitly trust that the people who are summarizing these papers, the people who wrote them, to actually describe what they contain accurately.
Right.
Right. So if you write one thing and then say you wrote another, you fool a lot of people into believing what you said you wrote instead of what you actually did write. And that's a problem, because by the time, people actually be like, oh, well, okay, let's sit down and read this and all that. All the newspaper headlines have been written. All the news articles have been gone. And your interpretation, the false one, has been blasted all over the place.
Right.
Meanwhile, even the people who do sit down and read the stuff, to them, the principle of charity means that they're actually going to be, sort of soft and all that. Well, the partisans are like, aha, this discredits gender studies, this is all the folks and all that. Right. Everybody else is going to be like, well, you kind of made a point, yeah, I disagree with what you did, but, there's a little kernel of truth in all that. But that's not really the case. You lied.
Yeah, there's not even a kernel of truth here.
No. In fact, here, let me quote you something I read in the Washington Post just earlier on today. We may find some solace in the fact that we've been through all this before. Sokol showed already, more than 20 years ago, that postmodernism had run amok and certain sections of the research literature were a waste of ink and paper. That sort of scholarship never went away, and yet, surprise, surprise, civilization hasn't collapsed.
Right.
Yeah.
Go figure, hey?
Exactly. It's not the actual details that were there. It's the summary that gets passed around, and we just keep doing this over and over again.
Yeah. And it never actually addresses any real issue. It's just like you say, like a fake targeting of studies they don't like.
Exactly. There is no there.
Right. Yeah.
There really is nothing here to learn other than, well, you can fool people some of the time.
Oh, geez, eh?
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. And particularly people who already have an axe to grind.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you look at the outlets who wrote on this, you see like a lot of the National Review, Washington Times and all that. Basically, very right-leaning articles already.
Right.
You know, Kuyet, for instance, had one as well, talking about, oh, this is another major breakthrough and all that. No, this is just an ideological axe that's being ground. And us who actually can see through, who have enough knowledge to sort of see through their bullshit, we're not getting our voices heard.
Right, yeah.
So that's what they're really gaining here. This is part of the whole culture war, using dishonesty and all that to shove their points through and basically make us all a little bit less smart, I don't know, less knowledgeable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, part of me wonders what the end game is here. Do they actually feel like they can get like gender studies shut down, or is there something they want, some kind of, I don't know, overhaul of gender studies that they feel needs to be done?
Actually, yeah. If you go, they've got a write-up in Arrow magazine, and if you scroll to the very bottom, they actually describe what they want done.
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to go by memory. Apologies if I'm mischaracterizing some of it.
Okay.
But basically, what they want is for universities to undergo an audit of these courses.
Okay.
I mean, think about that for a second. That's assuming universities don't actually check the quality of the courses they offer.
Right.
That if they actually did, wake up or whatever reason and actually sit down and check their courses, they would go, well, this feminism stuff, we can't have that. Doesn't make any sense. And then promptly reject it. It's utterly pie in the sky. I mean, you've heard of Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Did you ever read his petition?
I have not.
He actually submitted a petition to his followers and said, hey, as many people sign it as you can. He talked about the scourge of postmodernism and blah, blah, blah and all that. And his solution was all universities stop teaching these courses.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, all universities just stop. So there's really not much difference between Carl Benjamin and Peter Boghossian and co in this case, right?
Right. Yeah,
everybody stop.
Everybody just stop doing gender studies.
Yeah, well, in fact, even in Boghossian's case, it's not that far. That basically, every university stop what you're doing and audit these courses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no.
Well, yeah, it seems presumptuous at the least to think that his little experiment here actually would be something to justify such a thing.
Yeah.
I was reading a Slate article earlier today about this, and they mentioned that there's a few of these studies that they actually just fabricated a bunch of data, much like this dog park one. They fabricated a whole bunch of data, and to somebody who's going through it, like, it might actually look like they did some work. Whether they agree with the conclusions or not, like, is disagreeing with the conclusions a reason to reject a paper in some journals?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
All you've got to do basically is justify it. And again, I should also mention I have gone through the peer review process. I've had one paper published, although it's an undergrad journal, so not much of an accomplishment. I've had one paper rejected multiple times. One paper rejected multiple times, one rejected once. I'm currently pitched to my advisor on another paper, which I want to try and get published in December. So yeah, I have some experience with this, and I can say, no, they don't reject something per se for that.
Right.
What they'll usually do when it comes to rejection is either say, well, okay, this isn't an appropriate venue for this thing. You should try another journal, and sometimes offer it, if they think that there's some merit there, they'll probably forward it on to reviewers. And usually they're pretty generous. Like, basically, the editor will have sort of a quick glance over it, sort of weigh the basic, cons and all that. And if they think it's at least plausible, they'll send it out for review.
Right. I follow Retraction Watch a bit.
Yeah.
And there's constantly papers being retracted that got published in various journals. And it just strikes me as, like, when something like this comes out, like, have these guys not ever heard of Retraction Watch? They don't know that papers get retracted in all sciences because of flaws and errors and bad writing or whatever?
And in fact, what's hilarious, too, is they got 4 papers published, the Boghossian and co. How many do you want to guess have already been retracted?
All of them.
2.
2.
And that was just within a couple of days.
Right.
In academics, that is a stunningly fast turnaround.
No kidding, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, wait a minute. You're talking about shoddy things and all that, and yet it's retracted within, almost instantaneously from once the headlines start hitting. It's like,
yeah.
Okay, this isn't really supporting your conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wish that I could say that was the only paper that had that, but as I'm reading more and more what other people say, it confirms that every other paper is kind of like this.
Right.
There's one thing I was reading on Tumblr from username Typical Academic, where somebody had pointed out, well, what about the Mein Kampf paper? They got one chapter of Mein Kampf published in a journal. Isn't that just what? Outrageous and all that? And the person actually on Typical Academic was like, wait a minute, did you actually read the paper and all that? There, I'll actually just quote them right here since I got the text. Quote, the author's description of fashionable buzzwords stitched in seems to be entirely dishonest. The rewrite is extensive enough that I could barely identify which sections of the relevant chapter was the source. For example, there's a repeated theme of avoiding coercion when aiming for unity, which isn't part of the Mein Kampf chapter. Unquote.
Hmm.
When we think of Mein Kampf, we think it's basically just dripping in pure evil, that, everything is going to be about how much Hitler hates the Jews and all that. That's not the case. There's actually one chapter in there where it talks about building activist movements.
Right.
And some of it is actually fairly tame, It's basically all about building solidarity and all that. Let me get back to what typical academic said. Where are we? In any case, there isn't much in the way of eliminationist rhetoric, unquote, unless you use a lot of creative interpretation. Even in the original chapter, the relevant section is mostly a list of things for building a political movement without regard to the content of the movement. Like, for instance, their advice includes, you can't do things by half measures. When a point that mentions destroying enemies occurs in a Mein Kampf, it is completely omitted, not buzzword swapped at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, consequently, basically, to unquote from there, basically it just sort of takes this one chapter about activism, rips out anything that would be sort of objectionable, and turns it into sort of pablum about, well, we need unity, and we've got to, stick together to build activist movements. The reviewers themselves, who actually rejected it, this is one that never got published even.
Okay.
The reviewers were basically just like, well, this is just dull platitudes. You're not really saying anything interesting here.
So it got rejected based on that.
So it got rejected. But of course, what's everybody saying? We published a paper we got a paper submitted based on Mein Kampf, and the reviewers were charitable to us at some point.
Right. I saw a Twitter thread with somebody who he was a reviewer of one of the papers. I can't remember which one.
Yeah, a reviewer won on I forget which one it was. I've actually got it sitting somewhere on my blog, but yeah, it's easy enough to find. His first name is David something or other.
He basically
got 3,000 likes. Go on.
Yeah, he basically just said that he was being generous and trying to get them to write their paper in a better way because it just seemed like really amateurish or something.
Yeah.
It didn't seem unreasonable.
Yeah, people don't like rejection. If you've worked at all in published science and all that, that you get a lot of rejections.
Right.
So you actually try and be fairly kind, to the people who are there. Again, principle of charity. We're going to be nice to people. But if you're going to be nice and charitable, even when you reject their paper and all that, you're going to leave quotes in there which turn it into, fodder for somebody to quote mine and turn back at you.
Yeah. Yeah, if being charitable is suddenly like a thing that people can use against you, and that's, not good.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, some of their ideas that they consider, absurd or just ridiculous. Here's my favorite one, actually. And, this is based on, this one sort of came up in one of the blog posts that I had wrote on this. One of their absurdity can be summed up in the following quote. This is from their paper itself. The fat body is a legitimately built body.
Okay.
Unquote. That they thought was beyond absurd. The fat body is a legitimately built body. In fact, here, let me read from their methodology. It's a little bit more expanded.
Okay.
That it is only oppressive cultural norms which make society regard the building of muscle rather than fat admirable. The fat body is a legitimate built body. And that both bodybuilding and fat activism could be benefited by including fat bodies displayed in non-competitive ways as part of professional bodybuilding.
Okay.
Well, what exactly is absurd about that?
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's like if it was somebody who wasn't hoaxing writing it, it would be like an examination of what's going on with body shaming and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not a bad thing, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, the phrase is super problematic in it of itself. The fat body is a legitimately built body, is their absurdity. Right. What do they mean by built? Are they saying that fat people are illegitimate?
Right. Yeah, like that their bodies are, there's, yeah.
Are they saying that fat people are unattractive? I mean,
although that wouldn't surprise me coming from Peter Boghossian and some of the things he's tweeted out before.
Oh yeah.
I think he said something about why is it male feminists always have poor body habitus or something.
Oh yeah. I did a whole blog post on that one, basically saying like, okay, let's take him seriously. This is what he actually means.
Right.
Oh. It does not go where you think it goes. But yeah, probably the most charitable interpretation of built is that they actually mean like bodybuilding, weightlifting,
right,
and all that. Building up muscle, building up that. So when you sort of think of it in terms of athletics, it starts to sound a little bit more plausible, right?
Right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But have you actually seen strongman competitors?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're usually not like lean guys like you would see on a bodybuilding stage.
No, they're actually quite, chunky for the most part.
Yeah.
They carry a fair bit of extra fat. And I mean, that actually sort of comes from the thing itself. There's a great article on PopSci which actually goes over some of it, where basically when you're just going to just build, as much muscle as possible, it doesn't make sense to, be worried about fat and all that. Because the same things you need to eat build muscle will also build fat.
Yeah.
When you're chewing through 8,000 calories a day, just shovel the calories in. Who cares about the weight?
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to weightlifting, the extra fat isn't really much of a concern. If you think about it, where do you keep most of your fat? On your belly.
Yeah.
Not on your arms. The things you're using for lifting and all that.
Yeah.
So in most cases, when you're lifting things, you maybe only have to lift your belly fat, at most a meter or so. But you're lifting this massive heavy weight, which is double your weight sometimes.
Yeah.
Several meters.
Yeah.
So it doesn't factor in.
So there is like you say, like legitimately built different body types.
Yeah.
Like even if you took them at the most charitable interpretation of the word legitimate, which I'm not terribly apt to do from their perspective, but
well, yeah, given how many times they've lied already.
But yeah, even if you took that at face value, it would be like, yes, okay, so different body types are still legitimately built, and there's not on its face something wrong with looking at that from an academic perspective.
No. And I mean, people have found, heavier bodies attractive. There's the whole thing in the Philippines, I think, and the Polynesians, where they actually were attracted to people who were overweight.
Right.
It was a sign that you were healthy, that you were eating well, that you could provide for yourself quite nicely. It's just in North America, we have this obsession with being thin.
Right.
And all these people being from North America, they fall into that line of thinking.
Right. Yeah. It's very, like you say, Western centric.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. What else can we say about this?
Oh, that is maybe a third to half of my material.
Is that right?
Oh, yes. There is so much more. Now, we are running low on time, so I'll maybe just go over one or two other things which stuck out at me.
Sure.
I mean, for one thing, their whole methodology was basically, let's take these papers and submit them to, Grievance Studies, as they call them, journals and all that.
Right.
And point and laugh when they're accepted. Okay. And what about if we submit them to other journals?
Right.
Like, what if we actually did what, Al Khan did, for instance, and took a nonsense biology paper and submitted it to a biology journal? How often would it be accepted?
Right.
If it's accepted as often or more often than when you find with these so-called, Grievance Studies things, then what's the complaint?
Right, yeah.
They don't actually have any, their whole point is that the Grievance Studies is uniquely bad, and yet all they've only looked at are Grievance Studies journals. They're not checking anything else.
Right. Yeah, there's no, quote, a control, as it were, right?
Exactly. And in fact, someone has actually asked them about this. There's an article in Chronicle of Higher Education where, somebody criticized them for, where's the controls and all that. And they actually the author got in touch with, Pluckrose, Lindsay, and Boghossian, and said, okay, what about controls?
Right.
All right. From the Chronicle of Higher Education article, those three were reached by phone in Portland and said that the rejected papers serve as a control of sorts.
Right. A control of sorts, hey?
Yeah, no, that's not how that works.
From
their methodology, what they would do if a paper was rejected is they would take the feedback from it, rewrite it to incorporate that feedback, and resubmit it.
Right.
A paper that was rejected would become accepted on a second round. And in fact, if you look at their stats, every single paper they submitted was rejected on the first time, as far as I can tell. So there is no real difference between rejected and accepted papers other than time.
Right. Huh.
And not only that, but I mean, if they're rewriting it, they're basically getting feedback on how to better improve their hoax. Compare that with Al Khan, who took that same paper and submitted it, the same one, to 30 journals.
Right.
No modifications, no nothing. Sorry, 14 journals. I'm getting confused with my my hoaxes. There's other ones out there.
Yeah. Is the, the editing done after review, that introduces new variables if one were to consider this an actual experiment, right?
Exactly.
So then you can't just introduce new variables without controlling for those variables as well.
Mm-hmm.
It seems.
And not only that, but they didn't submit 20 identical papers to these journals.
Right.
They submitted 20 different ones.
Right.
In fact, let me quote from their thing. Let me give me a little bit here just to see if I can find it. Aha. To quote themselves from their methodology, some papers took bigger risks in this regard than others. Some were blatantly, bananas that no sane person would get. Some were not. Some were designed to actually look like, in their eyes, legitimate papers. They may have found the ideas absurd, but it was basically sort of taking the norms of that and deliberately trying to make it look more like Sokol's paper.
Right.
Not obviously wild. Well, guess which ones get published? The not absurd ones.
Yeah.
Guess which ones don't get published? So what you sort of have is something like a Texas sharpshooter kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Where, the ones that succeed, and you point your thing at that and say, see, these are the ones, these are the ones that do. And all the nonsense, which you could not get published and all that, everybody ignores that and it just sort of goes away. Unless it makes for good headlines, like the Mein Kampf one.
Right. Even though that was rejected.
Yeah. It was, quite solidly rejected there. And not only did they submit 20 different papers, not only did they submit, varying qualities of papers from good to bad.
Right.
Not only did they revise their papers continually, it looks like every one of their papers had at least one round of peer review and revision on it, in order to improve it.
Right.
Not only all that, but they didn't stick to the same journal. Quoting from their methodology, we wrote academic... hang on, let me make sure I'm reading the right one. Okay, I got the right quote now. From their methodology. Each paper was submitted to higher-ranked journals first, and then down a line of suitable alternatives until one of the following occurred. It was accepted, it was deemed too unlikely to succeed for regions we came to understand or continue with, or we ran out of time.
Jeez.
So they start at the top,
Yeah.
they take the high-quality feedback they get, and they make a better paper from that. And they submit it to a journal which has less quality control on it.
Right.
And, if they get rejected from there, well, they refine it again based on the feedback they get, and they shift down in quality further on. There are actually lists of, academic journals, which rank them by, their impact factor on that. It's sort of a slightly sketchy metric, but it gives you sort of a good idea of just how acceptable these ones are.
Right.
Want to guess what the highest ranked journal they got accepted to in gender studies was?
What was it?
Number 9 on the list.
Okay.
They just barely got to the top 10. If you look at the rest, it's like the 20th ranked journal, the 30th ranked journal.
Right.
And this, certainly this, I don't want to, compare it to like Alcon's, predatory journals and all that on the low end.
Right.
This is out of a list of 128 considered so journals and all that. So they're sort of mid-level, not sort of the premier stuff, but also not the bargain basement stuff. And yet, to read their things, they're talking about, oh yeah, these are all top flight journals and all that. It's like, no, they're not.
They did the same thing with the penis hoax. Or conceptual penis hoax.
Well, not quite. The penis hoax, they aimed even lower than that.
Well, true, but it was one of the rhetorical strategies that a lot of people who argued for their conclusions said was that this is a top level journal, and it just wasn't.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. So, I guess, what else do you got anyway?
I got one last one, and then we can wrap this one up. Okay. You've never published anything in a peer-reviewed journal.
I have not.
Okay. Well, do you think that all peer reviewers are identical?
I would guess not.
No. That would be an excellent guess. It's most certainly is not the case. Some of them are really good and keen. Some of them are bored and disinterested.
Yeah.
Peer reviewers themselves are not paid.
Right.
There are volunteers who are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. And they have to sit down and analyze your, 10-page paper or whatever. I think one of the ones I submitted was like 15 pages or whatever. You have to sit down and you have to go through that. You'll even, go to the point of catching grammar mistakes. If you read the reviewers, that's precisely what they did. They'll go down to that level of granularity.
Right.
You sit down, you can spend weeks reading this paper, and then you submit the feedback back. Sometimes just by rolling the dice, you're going to get lucky and get a lazy peer reviewer.
Yeah.
The tradition is basically that you've got like 3 peer reviewers per paper. The editor looks at it, and they don't necessarily read it all, but they sort of, skim it based on all that. And then the peer reviewers are the ones who do the main heavy lifting. Well, given that they've submitted 20 different papers to 20 different journals of varying quality and all that,
right?
What are the odds that they happen to find 3 relatively slack peer reviewers?
Probably not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when you see their success rate of 4, given that they wrote decent, papers a la Sokol, stuff that actually wasn't absurd on the face of it, even if they thought it was.
Yeah.
4 actually is really not that impressive.
No. Yeah, and weren't those ones mainly the ones that had all the fake data kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
you mentioned that earlier. There's a clear bias to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it just seems, I don't know.
Yeah, more of the theoretically organized ones, those were the ones that had the higher rejection rate.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. So, what do they think they accomplished here?
They think they have shed a light on Grievance Studies and how just completely moon-boot it is for the most part. Moon-bat it is.
Okay. So, they think that, yeah, okay. I just...
And this is assuming they aren't actually trying to actively deceive us.
Right.
Given just how badly they've mischaracterized their own paper, that's something even Alan Sokol didn't do.
Right.
He misunderstood his paper, sure, but he never actually sort of made errors and lied about what was in it. To him, the whole idea of, physics actually influencing culture, was ridiculous. But he never said that it did anything other than talk about, physics influencing culture.
Right.
In this case, they're talking about training people like dogs to the public. Boy, when you read their paper, that's tucked as a metaphor on one of the last pages in there in the discussion section where you're supposed to be pie in the sky and talk about maybes and, brainstorm all the stuff. This is a step below Sokol. And Sokol is nowhere near as strong as we thought it was.
Yeah. I seem to recall even like a couple of years ago, he came out and wrote an article saying like, I kind of don't think this proved like that there was this overarching problem that I thought there was back when I wrote the article or this paper. So I think he kind of downplayed the role he initially thought that he had on those studies. But, yeah. And then these guys come out and swinging, thinking that they've done another so-called hoax or whatever.
Yeah. Or maybe claiming that they've done one, but deliberately just sort of trying to get on wingnut welfare.
Yeah.
There is a large, amount of funds to actually getting into things like National Review and all that and becoming sort of a cause célèbre on, the far right.
Right. Yeah.
The extreme conservatism.
Yeah. Is that, you think, what's actually going on here? Was this a legitimate attempt at this, or is this just a garnering of support from people they already agree with?
Honestly, I don't know. It's deeply suspicious that they would misrepresent their things on this level.
Right.
But this is Peter Boghossian we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
He could really be that self-deluded.
Yeah.
I can't rule it out.
No, I think that's a fair statement. When the conceptual penis hoax paper came out, I wrote a rant and I did it on the show. And, yeah, like this smug self-satisfaction that seems to come from quote unquote skeptics when they feel like they've proven that gender studies is, useless and should be ignored. It's, I don't know, it's really frustrating.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, they don't even deal with sort of the best research that's out there. I've actually done blog posts where I said, okay, well, let's actually look in a feminist studies journal and see what's inside it. And it turns out it's actually usually quite empiric, quite solid and all that, really well described.
Yeah. Instead of actually reading papers from journals in feminism, they instead try out these hoaxes to try and prove those journals aren't any good.
Yeah. And I mean, a ton of cherry picking too. Christiosity has an excellent video on real peer review. Oh,
yes. Yeah.
Yes. You have seen it, I'm sure.
Yes. I talked to her a little bit about that, during the summer. She pretty much tears real peer review apart as right-wing propaganda. Yep.
And guess how, this whole thing was exposed? Peter Boghossian and friends actually had planned to do an 18-month thing in total, and then, go public with it on their thing. But they had to come public early. You want to know why?
Why?
Rear peer review spotted them.
Oh, geez.
It found one of their nonsense papers, and it laughed at them. And that got a journalist curious, who followed up on that. And so, about a year into their planned 18-month thing, they had to go public early.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Nutty right-wingers outing nutty right-wingers.
That's funny.
We're at the Ouroboros here.
Right. Yeah. It is the most ridiculous timeline. Jeez. So I guess we're coming up on close to an hour. What should we say in closing here? What do you think is the final thoughts on this subject?
Peter Boghossian is a bad person. Everybody associated with Boghossian is a bad person. They should all be ashamed. They should all just go away and be quiet, more or less.
Yeah.
I would like to come up with something more articulate than that, but given just the level of misrepresentation on there, I just can't. I mean,
yeah.
This is it,
No, that sounds about right to me. I just random story off of the top of my head. I used to really enjoy, I really enjoyed the manual for creating atheism or atheists. And I thought, okay, well, this Socratic method of asking questions that's a great way to get people to examine what they actually believe. And then it's just slowly but surely Peter Boghossian has shown more and more that he's not actually capable of that self-examination that he expects from others.
Yeah.
And it's been disappointing. And I mean, more and more I see that of the big name skeptics.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, we could rattle names off for people who fall into that trap.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's ironic. I actually bought a copy of, A Manual for Creating Atheists too.
Right.
In my case, though, I read the first chapter or two, saw, this is just the Socratic method, and tossed it aside. It's like, okay, I know this stuff. Never mind.
Yeah. My buddy Mike, he used to be on our show, and he, when we were talking about it initially, that's what he was saying, this is just the Socratic method. He studied philosophy, so he just, okay, this is just part of what you do with discourse.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I was kind of like, oh, well, this is amazing. I didn't know any of this. But, yeah.
No, it sort of works. The problem is, though, people sort of instinctively sort of realize what's going on.
Yeah, that's right.
If you don't put forward arguments of your own, people quickly realize, wait a minute, you're just attacking me without providing anything on your own. And they sort of shut down and go, it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't provide an actual back and forth, which most people require, at least on some level. Mm-hmm. So
it works in small doses, but as the one thing to do, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, I guess there's not much else to say.
No, I've sort of hammered over all of my other material, just in a quick thing and all that. Just sort of summarized it all. Again, you've got access to my blog and all that, so you can drop some links into the show notes.
Will do.
Mm-hmm. And so if people actually want to read the thousands upon thousands of words I have written on this,
yeah,
you can, although I would advise packing a lunch.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe pause, come back to it when you have more time or whatnot. Mm-hmm. But
take frequent stretches.
That's right. They're definitely worth reading. I quite enjoyed them, and I enjoy your blog in general. So,
thanks.
I will definitely provide links to that. Is there anywhere else that people can maybe find stuff that you've done?
Oh no, I'm sort of a computer scientist, and we just do not trust computers at all. So basically, it's just the blog. That's Reprobate Spreadsheet on Free Thought Blogs.
Perfect.
That's by far the best way to go. And if you want a bit of a preview, I'm actually thinking of starting up a Patreon. So,
neat.
Not public yet, but it'll show up on the blog when it does. So
awesome. Well, with that, I will hit the stop button and have a good night.
I will. You too, man.
All right, that's it for this episode of the Skeptic Studio. I hope you enjoyed it. For anything else, you can contact me at mail@brainstormblog.net. You can follow HJ on his blog, Reprobate Spreadsheet on Free Thought Blogs. You can follow the show on Twitter at BrainstormPod. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/brainstormpodcast or join our discussion group. Search for the Brainstorm Podcast Discussion Group. Or you can follow me on Twitter at Hardcore Skeptic. Thanks to our financial supporters: Kayla, Janet, Kim, Stephanie, Zach, the Utah Outcasts, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Destin Sucks, Bob Glenn, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, Magnus, several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave, Positively Skeptical, Rob, Keith, the Podonk Polymath, Larry, the Flying Spaghetti Monster, Sauce Be Upon Him, and Freethinker215. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Thanks to Dave Roman of the Roman Empire Studios for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabbi from Embrace the Void podcast for doing the voiceover for it. And thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find all the respective links for those fine folks in the show notes at brainstormblog.net. Make sure to follow the show on Spreaker for notifications whenever a new episode is up or we go live. That's at brainstormradio.net. Check out our new online store for some Brainstorm gear. It's tpublic.com/store/brainstorm-podcast-gear. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel, any guests, or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Cory, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.